Now, in the previous lecture, we talked about the iterators. In this lecture, we are going to talk about what a generator is in Python. Generators are relatively new to Python. A generator is a kind of iterator that is defined with a normal function syntax. Exactly how generators work is best shown through example. So let's take a look at a very simple example to understand how generators are created in Python. So making a generator is very simple. It's just like making a function. So let's simply create here a function. So I'm going to start with the define keyword to create a new function, and then I'm going to name the function. So here I'm going to create a function with the name inner. You can specify any name to this function, that doesn't matter. And in this parenthesis, I'm going to pass parameter to this function. Here I'm going to say nested, just like this. Specify scope for this function, and in this function, I'm going to call for loop. So here I'm going to say for outer in nested. So I'm going to loop through this nested parameter. So when the user calls this function, he's going to pass a nested list. Let me just first create a nested list here. Just above here, I'm going to create a nested list. So I'm going to simply create here a variable nested and pass nested list here. You can notice this is kind of a list inside list. Or you can say we have the list and inside it we have another list. This is what we call a nested list. Now I want to iterate this list. So I'm going to create here a function and pass parameter nested. You are free to specify any parameter name to this function. Then I'm going to create here for loop to iterate over this list. Then I'm going to just create here for outer in nested. Now this for loop is going to use to iterate over this outer list. Then in this for loop, I'm going to create another for loop. So here I'm going to say for inner element in outer. You can notice here I'm using here outer. I'm going to get the element from this outer loop. Now in this for loop, I'm going to say yield element. Now at this time, this keyword is new for all of you. I will explain the use of this keyword after a few seconds. But just for now, just add here yield element. Just after this function, once the function is finished, let's create here a for loop again and then specify num in inner. I'm going to call this function inner, and to this inner function, I have this parameter. So I need to pass argument to this function when I call it. So I'm going to pass this nested variable here. So here I'm going to say nested, just like this. And then in this for loop, I'm going to simply print number. Let me first execute this file and show you the result. When I execute this file, I'm going to have 1 to 5 number on the screen. You can notice here I have a 1 to 5 number inside this nested list. Let me just explain these statements. So I'm going to create a simple list. And in this list, we have another list. So we'll call this a nested list. Now, just for that, I'm going to create a new function. I'm going to name it inner and pass parameter nested. I'm going to use this parameter to take the value when the user calls this function. Now, in this function, I'm going to call for loop to iterate over this outer list. You can notice here I have this outer bracket. So, to iterate over this outer list, I'm going to use this for loop. And to this for loop, I'm going to say for outer, I'm going to create here a simple variable outer and get all the elements inside this outer list in this variable. Once I have all these elements in this outer variable, I'm going to just create another for loop and get all this inner element using this element variable. So here I'm going to say element in outer. So once I have all this inner element using this for loop, I'm going to just yield this element. Now this function is pretty simple. First, this function is going to iterate over all the outer values of the supplied nested list. Then it iterates over the element of each outer value in order. So what's new here is the yield statement. Any function that contains the yield statement is called a generator. And it's not just a matter of naming. It will behave quite different from ordinary function. This function is now behave differently from the ordinary function. The difference is that instead of returning one value, as you do with return statement, you can yield several values one at a time. Each time a value is yielded, the function freezes. That is, it stops its execution at exactly that point and wait to be revoked. When it resumes its execution at the point where it stopped. So basically, yields is going to hold all the values of this for loop. Now let me just remove this yield and just add here return statement and show you the result. When I execute this file, I'm going to get an error message because object is not iteratable. So I'm going to just say here yield, and now this yield is going to return an object of the elements. once I have these elements, I'm going to just iterate it using this for loop. Now what I'm going to do is, once I have all these elements, let me just put all these elements in a simple list. How do I do that? The simple way to do is to call a list function. So here I'm going to say print list, and in the parentheses I'm going to call inner function and call the nested variable. Now when I execute this file, I'm going to have a list of these elements. Now these elements is now not in the nested list. I have a simple list as a result. You can do the same with the tuple as well. So if I just add here print and just call tuple, and if you pass here inner nested, you're going to get a tuple as a result. So basically, generators are used to return multiple values with a function. With the return statement, you will only return one value at a time. But with this yield statement, or you can say with this generator, you can return several values at a time. So this is how you can use generators in Python. So whenever you want to return several values at the same time, you can use this yield, or you can say you can use a generator in Python. Practice with this code to understand how generators are work in Python. Till then, I will see you in the next one.